On a frozen winter morning in a quiet Montana town, a 2-month-old golden retriever sat tied to a steel bench, his small body shaking, his injured leg barely holding him upright. He didn't cry, he didn't bark, he just stared down an empty road, guarding a child's backpack left beside him like a promise that never came back. Cars passed, snow kept falling. Everyone looked away. Everyone except one man who recognized that look. The look of being abandoned but still choosing to wait. Why this puppy refused to leave that bench and what people were willing to do to take him back will stay with you long after this story ends. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no life should be left behind in the cold, hit subscribe, because this story might change the way you see the world. Winter had settled hard over northern Montana, the kind that muted sound and pressed the world into stillness. Snow lay thick across the park, dulling footsteps, swallowing color, and turning breath into pale smoke beneath a low, unmoving sky. Jake Miller wasn't supposed to be in the park that early. He usually waited until the sun climbed a little higher before starting his maintenance rounds, but the previous night's snowfall had been heavy, and the town council had been anxious about icy paths. At 38, Jake had learned that small towns ran on quiet expectations rather than written rules. So he'd pulled on his insulated work jacket, the one with frayed cuffs and a faded county emblem on the chest, and driven out before dawn. Jake was a solidly built man, not tall but broad through the shoulders, with a posture shaped by years of manual work. His dark hair was perpetually untidy, curling slightly at the nape of his neck no matter how often he trimmed it. A short beard framed his jaw, more habit than style, and deep lines had begun to settle around his eyes, creases earned less from age than from vigilance. He was the kind of man who noticed things others walked past. The park looked empty at first. Benches half buried in snow lined the walking path. Bare trees stood like dark ribs against the gray sky. The frozen pond at the center was sealed under a dull sheet of ice, its usual birds nowhere to be seen. Jake exhaled slowly, his boots crunching as he stepped off the path toward the first bench. That was when he saw the movement. It was slight, almost nothing, just a tremor low to the ground near the far bench by the old iron fence. Jake stopped. Years earlier, he might have dismissed it as drifting snow or a loose plastic bag. But something in him, something sharpened by past mistakes, kept his eyes fixed. He took another step, then another, his hand tightening around the handle of his shovel. The shape resolved itself as he got closer. A puppy, a golden retriever, no more than 2 months old, sat pressed against the leg of a metal bench. His fur, pale gold beneath layers of clinging snow, was matted and stiff with cold. A thin red leash wrapped around his small body and the bench leg, cinched tight enough that he couldn't stand properly. His paws trembled, not with panic, but with exhaustion. Jake crouched instinctively, lowering himself slowly so as not to startle the animal. The puppy didn't bark. He didn't whine. He didn't even lift his head. His dark eyes were open, wide and glassy, fixed on the empty path leading out of the park, as if someone might still appear there if he watched long enough. "Hey," Jake said quietly, his voice rough from the cold. "Hey there, buddy." No reaction. Jake frowned. Most puppies that young reacted to sound, movement, anything. This one didn't. He looked finished, as though whatever energy fear usually provided had already burned out. Only then did Jake notice the backpack. It lay beside the bench, half buried in snow, its straps stiff and cracked with age. A child's backpack blue once, now faded nearly gray. Jake reached for it, hesitating only a moment before brushing away the snow and unzipping it. Inside were a baby bottle, empty but clean, A small towel folded carefully. A knit cap meant for a child, stretched and thin. Everything was damp with cold, but not discarded haphazardly. It had been placed. Jake swallowed. He reached for the puppy's leash next, his fingers stiff inside his gloves. The knot was crude but firm, pulled tight by someone who hadn't wanted it to come loose. Jake worked at it slowly, murmuring nonsense under his breath, his focus narrowing until the world consisted only of the knot and the small body trembling beside him. When the leash finally loosened, the puppy sagged forward, barely catching himself. Jake slid his arm under the tiny chest and lifted carefully. The puppy didn't resist. He didn't lean into Jake's warmth either. He simply hung there, light as a bundle of clothes, his gaze never leaving the path. That was what unsettled Jake most. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pain, it was waiting. Jake tucked the puppy against his jacket, shielding him from the wind, and stood. As he turned, something caught his eye. A folded piece of paper tucked into the side pocket of the backpack. He paused, then pulled it free. The paper was creased over and over, the edges softened by handling. Someone had folded it carefully, then unfolded it again, as if unable to decide whether to leave it at all. Jake began to open it. The sound cut through the silence before he could read a word. An engine. Low. Steady. Not close, but not far either. Jake froze. The puppy stiffened faintly in his arms, his small body tensing in a way that hadn't happened before. His ears twitched, and for the first time, he made a sound. A shallow, breathy noise caught somewhere in his throat. Jake turned slowly, scanning the snowy road beyond the park fence. Through the falling snow, headlights glowed briefly, diffused and pale. A vehicle idled for a moment, just long enough for Jake to feel the weight of being observed, then rolled forward and disappeared down the road. No horn, no urgency, just gone. Jake stood there longer than he realized, his heart beating harder than the situation seemed to warrant. When he finally looked down, the puppy's eyes were no longer fixed on the path. They were fixed on Jake. Not pleading, not trusting, just searching. "I've got you," Jake said, though the words felt thinner than he liked. "You're not staying here." The puppy didn't respond. Jake folded the paper without reading it and slid it back into the backpack. He slung the bag over his shoulder, adjusted his grip on the small, shaking body, and began the walk back to his truck. Every few steps, he glanced behind him. The park remained empty, but the sense of being watched followed him all the same, pressing against his back like the cold itself, all the way to the road. The shelter smelled like antiseptic and damp fur, a familiar mix that usually settled Jake's nerves. That morning, it only sharpened his unease. He carried the puppy inside against his chest, feeling the small body shiver through layers of canvas and wool. The intake room lights were already on, harsh and white against the gray outside. A woman in scrubs looked up from the counter as the door swung closed behind him. Dr. Emily Carter moved with the efficient calm of someone who had learned not to rush even when everything felt urgent. She was in her early 40s, tall and straight-backed, with ash-blonde hair pulled into a tight knot that never seemed to loosen. Fine lines framed her mouth, not from age so much as from years of choosing words carefully, especially when delivering bad news. Emily had grown up on a ranch outside Helena, lost her first dog to an untreated injury when she was a teenager, and had carried that failure with her into every exam room since. She reached out, her hands steady and warm as she accepted the puppy from Jake. "What have we got?" she asked, her voice low. "Found him tied to a bench," Jake said. "He's been out there all night, maybe longer." Emily's eyes flicked to the puppy's paws, his ears, the stiffness in the way his hind legs hung. She didn't say anything yet. She laid him gently on the stainless steel table and began her exam. The puppy didn't protest. He didn't cry when she pressed along his ribs or lifted his ears. When her fingers moved to his back leg, though, his breath hitched, just once. It was subtle, but Emily noticed. "So there is pain," she murmured. She rotated the leg carefully, watching the puppy's face more than the limb itself. The joint moved, but not cleanly. There was resistance where there shouldn't have been. "This isn't fresh," Emily said at last. "The swelling's gone down, but it healed wrong, or started to." Jake frowned. Could he have fallen? Emily shook her head. "Not like this." Puppies fall all the time. This looks like compression. Prolonged. Something kept him from moving properly. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Emily wrapped the leg in fresh padding and motioned for one of the volunteers to bring a heat pad. "He's young," she added. "That's the good news. But cold like this? Infection sets in fast. If he'd stayed out another night—" She didn't finish the sentence. They moved the puppy to a quiet kennel near the intake desk. The space was small but clean, lined with soft blankets. Jake crouched to lower him down, waiting for the little body to relax. It didn't. The puppy curled inward immediately, nose tucked against his chest, eyes open and fixed on the doorway. The sound of boots on tile made his muscles tense. When a truck passed outside, tires hissing on slush, his whole body trembled. Jake straightened slowly. "What about food?" he asked. Emily prepared a small bowl of warmed formula and set it near the puppy's head. The puppy didn't move. "Shock can look like this," she said, "or something close to it. We'll give him time." Jake lingered long after he should have left. He sat on the bench outside the kennel, elbows on his knees, watching the puppy's eyes track every movement near the door. Eventually, he remembered the backpack. He brought it in and placed it on the counter. Emily glanced at it, then at Jake. "Anything inside?" "Just baby stuff," Jake said. "And this." He unfolded the paper at last. The words were written in block letters, uneven but deliberate, as if the writer had gone over them more than once. "Don't put him in the system. Don't post pictures. If he disappears, let it happen." Jake read it twice. Emily's expression hardened as she leaned over his shoulder. "That's not a surrender note," she said quietly. "No," Jake agreed. "It's a warning." They stood in silence for a moment. The heater clicked on overhead. Somewhere deeper in the shelter, a dog barked, a sharp, demanding sound that echoed down the hall. The puppy flinched. Jake looked back at him, something heavy settling in his chest. "I'm calling him Sonny," he said suddenly. Emily glanced at him. "Sonny?" "He needs something bright," Jake replied, though the words felt inadequate even as he spoke them. The name didn't change anything. Sonny still didn't eat. He didn't sleep, not really. He drifted, eyes open, breath shallow, waiting for a sound only he seemed to hear. By late morning, the shelter began to stir. Volunteers arrived, stamping snow from their boots, hanging coats on hooks. Among them was Mark Lewis, a college student with a soft face and perpetually rumpled brown hair, who moved more slowly than the others, as if afraid of startling the animals. He paused outside Sonny's kennel, frowning. "That one's quiet," Mark said. Jake nodded. "Too quiet." Around noon, the front door opened again. Jake heard the bell before he saw the man. He stood just inside the entryway, brushing snow from his shoulders. He was tall, lean, wrapped in a dark coat that looked too thin for the weather. His hair was black and cut short, his face narrow, clean-shaven, with eyes that moved too quickly, cataloging the room. He smiled when he spoke, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon," the man said. "I'm looking for a dog." Emily stepped forward, professional and guarded. "We can help you fill out a form." "It's a golden," the man continued, waving off the clipboard she offered. "A puppy. Went missing last night. Family's worried sick." Jake felt Sonny tense before he turned around. The puppy had lifted his head. His eyes were locked on the man. His body began to shake, harder than before, a full-body tremor that rattled the kennel door. A low sound escaped his throat. Not a bark, not a whine, but something strained and raw. Emily's hand went to the latch automatically, then stopped. "We don't have a golden listed," she said carefully. The man's gaze drifted past her, toward the intake area, toward Sonny. Jake stepped forward without thinking, placing himself between the man and the kennel. Up close, he noticed the faint scar along the man's jawline, thin and pale, like an old cut that had healed cleanly. "Describe the dog," Jake said. The man hesitated, just a beat too long. "Golden retriever," he said. "Male, young." "That's it?" Jake asked. The man's smile tightened. "Puppies all look the same at that age." Sonny's trembling worsened. His paws scraped weakly against the blanket, as if he wanted to retreat farther than the kennel would allow. Emily met Jake's eyes. Something passed between them, an understanding that didn't need words. "If you think you've lost an animal," she said, "you can leave your contact information. We'll call if anything turns up." The man studied her, then Jake, then Sonny again. For a moment, Jake thought he might argue. Instead, the man nodded. "Sure," he said. "I'll check back." He wrote down a number, his handwriting precise, almost mechanical. When he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Cold out there," he said lightly. "Not a good night for a puppy to be alone." The door closed behind him. The bell rang once. Sonny collapsed against the kennel wall, breathing fast, eyes still fixed on the door. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That," Emily said softly, "is not coincidence." Jake crouched beside the kennel, lowering himself until he was level with Sonny's eyes. "You're not lost," he murmured, "and you're not going anywhere." Sonny didn't look at him. He looked past him toward the door as another car slowed outside, tires crunching on snow. And this time, Jake felt it too. The certainty that whatever had left Sonny on that bench hadn't let go yet. The nights grew longer at the shelter. Or maybe they only felt that way to Jake. Snow kept falling in slow, deliberate sheets, piling against the windows and muffling the sounds of town until the world outside seemed sealed off. Inside, the lights stayed on later than usual. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it, the shift from routine to vigilance. Sonny ate only when Jake was there. Emily had tried first, kneeling beside the kennel with practiced patience, her voice soft, movements careful. Sonny had sniffed the bowl, then turned his head away, body tightening as if even hunger wasn't strong enough to pull him forward. When Jake stepped back into the room a few minutes later, still shrugging snow from his jacket, Sonny lifted his head immediately. His ears twitched, his gaze locked onto Jake's face. Only then did he eat. Jake sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, pretending not to watch too closely. Sonny's movements were mechanical. Lick, pause, swallow. As if each mouthful required permission. When Jake shifted his weight, Sonny froze, throat working anxiously until Jake stilled again. "That's imprinting," Emily said later, quietly, as they watched from a distance. "Or the beginning of it." Jake didn't answer. He was watching Sonny's sides rise and fall, the faint hitch in his breathing that appeared whenever footsteps passed the doorway. Each time Jake left, Sonny made a sound. It was barely audible, a tight little noise pressed deep in his chest, nothing like a whine. It sounded restrained, as if the instinct to call out had been trained down to a whisper. The first time Jake heard it, he stopped in the hall and closed his eyes. By the third night, Jake stayed. He told himself it was temporary, that he was just helping Emily monitor Sonny's condition, but he slept on a folding chair near the intake desk, boots still on, jacket wrapped tight. He woke at every sound, a heater clicking, pipes knocking, the distant bark of another dog. Each time, Sonny was awake too, eyes open, tracking. It was near midnight when Jake noticed the truck. He saw it through the side window as he stood pouring himself bad coffee from the machine that never worked right. A dark pickup idled across the street, parked without headlights, angled toward the shelter lot. Snow dusted its hood, melting slowly near the engine. Jake watched for movement. Nothing. He checked the clock, waited. After several minutes, the engine cut. The truck remained, dark and still. Jake didn't wake anyone. He stood there until the cold crept through the glass and into his bones, until his coffee went untouched. When he finally turned away, Sonny was staring at him from his kennel, body taut. "You see it too," Jake murmured. The truck was gone by morning. No tire tracks remained near the curb, only a smooth layer of snow that made Jake question his own memory. The day staff arrived, shaking snow from their coats, laughing too loudly as if to fill the space. Mark mentioned it first, squinting at the monitor near the front desk. "Was the camera always like that?" he asked. Jake stepped closer. The security feed still showed the front lot, but the angle was wrong shifted just enough that the far corner of the parking area was no longer visible. The timestamp showed no interruption, no glitch, no recorded movement. Emily frowned. "It doesn't move on its own." The shelter manager waved it off later that morning. Linda Harris had run the place for over a decade. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, with steel gray hair cut short and glasses that perched perpetually on the edge of her nose. She believed in procedure, in patterns, in not panicking without cause. It was how she'd kept the shelter open through funding cuts and brutal winters. "Wind rattles things," she said. "Someone probably bumped it. We can adjust it later." Jake wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded. Sonny didn't. He had been moved to a slightly larger kennel near the staff hallway, closer to where Jake worked. It was supposed to be temporary, but no one suggested changing it. Sonny followed Jake with his eyes whenever he passed. If Jake stopped, Sonny stilled. If Jake turned back, Sonny relaxed, just a fraction. Other dogs began to notice. A husky named Bear, a large gray-mottled male with clouded blue eyes and the patient demeanor of an older dog, pressed his nose to the bars when Jake walked by with Sonny's bowl. He didn't bark, just watched, tail swaying once, slow and thoughtful. Sonny pressed closer to the far wall, watching Bear with a wary intensity that softened only when Jake spoke. "You're safe," Jake said, though he wasn't sure who he meant it for. That afternoon, a volunteer Jake didn't recognize arrived to help with laundry. Her name was Sarah Collins. She was in her early 30s, tall and slender, with pale skin that flushed easily in the cold and auburn hair pulled into a loose braid that kept slipping over her shoulder. Her movements were careful, almost tentative, as if she'd learned to take up as little space as possible. When she smiled, it was quick and apologetic, the smile of someone accustomed to being reassured rather than reassuring. She noticed Sunny immediately. "That one's new," she said softly, pausing near his kennel. "He looks small." Jake nodded. "Too small." Sarah crouched, keeping her distance. Sunny didn't react to her at all. His eyes stayed on Jake. "He's bonded," Sarah said. "Already." "How can you tell?" Jake asked. "My sister fostered dogs," Sarah replied. After her accident." She hesitated, then shrugged. "Some animals decide fast, like they can't afford not to." Jake glanced down at Sunny, who had inched closer to the kennel door without realizing it. That night, the truck returned. Jake didn't see it this time. He heard it. The low hum of an engine outside the back fence, barely louder than the wind. Sunny reacted instantly. His body went rigid, head lifting, eyes wide. That tight, restrained sound rose again from his throat, sharper now. Jake stood. The sound stopped. He moved to the back door and cracked it open just enough to let in a blade of freezing air. The yard was empty, snow undisturbed. Beyond the fence, darkness pressed close. When he turned back, Sunny was staring at him, fear bright and unmistakable. "I know," Jake said under his breath. "I know." The rest of the night passed without incident, but Jake didn't sleep. By morning, the tension had settled into the building like an illness. Conversations were quieter. Doors closed more softly. Emily double-checked locks without comment. Linda ordered the exterior lights left on through the day. Jake began to feel it then. Not just concern for Sunny, but the creeping awareness that he himself had become part of whatever pattern was forming. He caught himself scanning reflections in windows, pausing before opening doors, listening for footsteps behind him. Sunny never left his sight. When Jake moved, Sunny moved, shifting closer to the front of the kennel, tracking his steps, responding to his voice before anyone else's. If Jake knelt, Sunny crept forward. If Jake stood, Sunny retreated, waiting. It wasn't trust yet, it was alignment. Late that afternoon, Jake adjusted the camera himself, angling it back to where it had been. He tightened the screws hard enough to hurt his fingers. By evening, it had shifted again. Only slightly, just enough. Jake stood beneath it, staring up, a cold certainty settling in his gut. Someone had been inside, and Sunny knew it. The storm arrived without drama, just pressure. Snow thickened in the afternoon, flakes growing heavy and wet, the sky lowering until it felt close enough to touch. By dusk, the wind picked up, rattling the shelter's siding and pushing drifts against the doors. Jake finished his last round just as the lights flickered, once, twice, and then went out entirely. Emergency bulbs hummed on, casting the hallways in a dull amber glow. Linda moved fast. Years of keeping the shelter alive through winters like this had carved efficiency into her bones. She barked orders with clipped calm, assigning pairs to check generators and doors. Her glasses slipped down her nose as she scanned the clipboard, jaw set. "The generator's old," she said. "We keep it running, we keep doors shut, and nobody wanders." Emily nodded, already pulling on gloves. Sarah gathered blankets with quick, quiet movements, her braids slipping loose as she worked. Jake headed for Sunny. The kennel felt smaller under emergency light. Shadows gathered at the corners, stretching with each gust of wind. Sunny stood the moment Jake appeared, paws braced, eyes wide. His body trembled, not from cold this time, but from something sharper. "It's okay," Jake said, dropping to a knee. "I'm here." Sonny pressed forward until his chest met the bars, nose pushing through the gap. Jake slid his fingers between the metal, feeling the puppy's breath flutter against his skin. The generator coughed to life outside with a low, uneven roar. Power stabilized enough to run heaters, but the storm kept howling. Doors thudded under wind pressure. Snow hissed against windows like thrown sand. The shelter settled into a long, alert night. Jake didn't leave Sonny. He took the chair from intake and dragged it close, sitting with his jacket still on. Sarah brought him coffee thin and bitter and didn't comment when he didn't thank her. She lingered a moment, eyes on Sonny, then moved on. Around midnight, the wind shifted. It carried sound differently then, flattened it, bent it. Jake heard something at the back fence. A scrape. Soft. Not metal on metal, more like fabric dragged across wire. Sonny froze. His head lifted, ears pinned. The tight sound rose again from his throat, harsher now, unmistakably fear. Jake stood, heart pounding, and walked the corridor toward the rear exit. Emily joined him without a word, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through snow and darkness outside, catching nothing but white and shadow. "Probably debris," Emily said quietly. Jake nodded, though his eyes didn't leave the fence line. The storm passed before dawn, burning itself out. Snow lay fresh and clean, smoothing the world into false calm. Jake woke stiff and disoriented, a blanket half slid off his shoulders. The generator still ran, a constant mechanical growl beneath everything else. Day staff began arriving, stamping snow, shaking out coats. Normal sounds returned. Voices, metal bowls clinking, dogs barking. Sonny didn't relax. Jake went to check the kennels with Mark. As they rounded the corner, something tugged at Jake's attention. Not where it should have been, but where it wasn't. The backpack. The child's backpack that had stayed tucked under the intake counter since Sonny arrived was gone. Jake stopped. "Where's the bag?" he asked. Mark blinked. "What bag?" "The one from the park." Mark shook his head. "I haven't seen it." They searched quickly at first, then more thoroughly. Intake desk, supply closet, laundry room. Nothing. No one remembered moving it. Linda frowned when Jake told her, irritation flickering across her features. "People come and go," she said. "In storms like that, things get misplaced." Jake didn't argue. He walked back to Sonny's kennel. That was when he saw the leash. It lay slack against the kennel door, not broken, not untied, cut. Cleanly. The fibers parted with a precision that didn't belong to wear or accident. Sonny was still there. He stood pressed against the back wall, body hunched, eyes wild. The moment he saw Jake, he lunged forward, stumbling on his injured leg, and shoved his head into Jake's knee. Jake crouched and wrapped his arms around the small body, feeling how hard Sonny shook. His own hands trembled now too. "It's okay," he said again, though the words rang hollow. Emily knelt beside them, her face pale. She touched the cut leash with careful fingers, then withdrew. "This wasn't a test," she said. "Someone intended to take him." "Why didn't they?" Sarah asked, her voice thin. Jake looked toward the back door, the windows, the fence beyond. "Because something stopped them." They went outside together. The snow beyond the shelter fence was pristine except for a line of footprints running parallel to the building. Human. Booted. Deliberate. The prints stopped near the back corner, close enough that whoever made them would have had a clear view of the kennels. Jake followed the line until it vanished beneath a drift. His stomach dropped. Sonny refused to be left alone after that. He trailed Jake everywhere he was allowed, pressed against his legs, eyes tracking his hands. When Jake stepped away, Sonny panicked, scrambling, nails scraping. Linda made an exception without comment, allowing Sonny to stay near intake while repairs were made. Jake felt the shift then, deep and irreversible. This wasn't caution anymore. It was proximity. The danger had crossed a line. That afternoon, a man arrived to help inspect the generator. His name was Tom Reyes. He was in his late 40s, stocky, with a thick mustache flecked with gray and hands permanently stained with oil. His movements were economical, his voice low and friendly in a way that suggested he'd learned how to put people at ease on job sites where tempers ran hot. "Storms like this expose weak points," Tom said as he checked the housing. "Doors, locks, habits." He glanced at the fence, at the footprints half hidden by new snow. "You folks had trouble last night?" Linda hesitated. Jake answered. "Yes." Tom nodded once. "You might want to think about temporary measures. Motion lights, cameras that don't rely on that angle." Jake watched him work, cataloging the way Tom's eyes lingered on the perimeter, how he asked questions without pushing. When Tom left, he paused by intake. "That dog yours?" he asked Jake. "Not yet," Jake said. Tom studied Sonny, how close he stood, how his eyes never left Jake's face. "He's chosen you," Tom said simply. Night fell again. This time, Jake didn't sleep at all. He sat on the floor with Sonny curled against his leg, one hand resting on the warm, living weight. Every sound scraped his nerves raw. When a car passed on the road, Sonny lifted his head, breath hitching. Jake understood then, with cold clarity. The threat wasn't hypothetical. It had hands. It had tools. It had been inside the building. And it had left without Sonny only because it hadn't finished. Jake pressed his forehead to the wall, listening to the wind die down outside, knowing that whatever had come for Sonny would come again, closer, quieter, prepared. Jake didn't tell anyone where he was going. He waited until late afternoon when the shelter's routine lulled into its shallow calm, then clipped a borrowed leash onto Sonny's collar and wrapped the puppy in a thick blanket. Sonny didn't resist. He pressed into Jake's chest, small body rigid, eyes tracking every movement beyond the doors. The truck ride felt longer than it was. Snow still lined the roads, though the plows had carved narrow paths through it. Jake drove without music, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Sonny's back, feeling the shallow, rapid breaths beneath the blanket. He chose the clinic deliberately, 30 miles south, past the last turnoff most people took, in a town that didn't ask questions unless they had to. The building sat low against the road, a single-story structure with peeling white paint and a flickering sign, North Ridge Veterinary. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood. Dr. Henry Walsh looked up from behind the counter as Jake stepped in. Walsh was in his late 60s, tall but slightly stooped, with a narrow face and a shock of white hair that stuck out at odd angles no matter how neatly he dressed. His beard was trimmed close, salt and pepper stubble framing a mouth that rarely smiled. Years earlier, he'd lost his practice partner in a highway accident caused by a drunk driver, and since then, something in him had withdrawn less patient with people, more precise with animals. "What have you got?" Walsh asked, already reaching for gloves. "Puppy," Jake said. "Golden, injured leg." Walsh nodded once and led them into the exam room without another word. Sonny reacted immediately. The moment Jake set him down, Sonny spun, eyes wide, searching for the door. His breath came fast, claws scraping on the tile as he tried to press closer to Jake's legs. "It's all right," Jake said, kneeling. "I'm here." Walsh watched the exchange with quiet interest. "He's scared of spaces," Walsh said. "Or separation." "Both," Jake replied. Walsh examined the leg carefully, his hands steady and practiced. Sonny flinched but didn't cry. He endured, body trembling, eyes locked on Jake's face like an anchor. "This was restrained," Walsh said after a moment. "Not recently, but long enough to matter." Jake swallowed. "Can you fix it?" Walsh met his eyes. "I can stabilize it. The rest depends on whether he keeps moving forward or backward." He wrapped the leg, firmer than before, and injected a mild sedative. Sonny sagged slightly, tension easing just enough to breathe. When they were done, Walsh leaned back against the counter. "You're hiding him," he said flatly. Jake didn't deny it. Walsh sighed. "I won't ask why, but you need to know. People who go looking for animals this hard usually don't stop." Jake nodded. "I know." The drive back was darker. Clouds swallowed what little daylight remained, turning the road into a tunnel of headlights and snowbanks. Jake's phone vibrated on the dashboard just as he crossed the county line. No caller ID. He ignored it at first. The vibration stopped, then started again. Jake answered. "You've taken something that isn't yours," a voice said. It was male, calm, unhurried, not raised, not whispered. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. "Who is this?" The man exhaled softly, almost amused. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Sonny stirred under the blanket, sensing the shift in Jake's body. "Leave the dog," the voice continued. "You don't want the consequences of keeping him." Jake said nothing. The line went dead. By the time Jake reached the temporary house, a small rental cabin on the edge of town, the sky had fully darkened. He carried Sonny inside, locking the door behind him, checking the windows twice before setting the puppy down near the fireplace. Sonny paced. He circled the room on unsteady legs, sniffing corners, pausing at the door, then returning to Jake. His breathing quickened, panic rising again despite the sedative. "It's just us," Jake said. "You're safe here." But Sonny didn't settle. Night pressed in, thick and silent. Jake dozed on the couch with his boots on, one hand hanging down so Sonny could touch him. Every creak of the cabin made his eyes snap open. Wind rattled the windows, branches scraped the siding. At some point, he never knew when, Sonny stopped breathing beside him. Jake woke with a jolt. "Sonny?" The blanket lay empty. The leash rested on the floor, neatly unclipped. Jake bolted upright, heart hammering, scanning the room. The door was still locked, the windows unbroken. No signs of a struggle. He found the back door ajar. Cold air poured in. Jake didn't stop to think. He grabbed his coat, flashlight, keys, and ran. The park came into view like a memory dredged up too fast. Snow lay undisturbed except for a single set of small paw prints leading toward the old bench by the iron fence. Jake followed them, breath burning in his lungs, his light bouncing wildly with each step. "Sonny!" he called, voice cracking. The bench loomed out of the darkness. Sonny lay beneath it. The leash was back around his collar, looped tight around the metal leg. His body shook violently, chest heaving. Beneath him, the snow was stained small, dark patches blooming where his injured leg had dragged across the ground. Jake dropped to his knees. "Oh God," he whispered. Sonny lifted his head weakly, eyes glassy but aware. The moment Jake touched him, he whimpered, a sound so small it barely existed, and pressed his face into Jake's coat. Jake fumbled with the knot, hands slick with cold and fear. When it came free, he scooped Sonny up, holding him tight, rocking slightly without realizing it. An engine started somewhere beyond the trees. Jake froze. Headlights flared briefly through the branches, then turned away. Tires crunched on snow. The sound faded, swallowed by distance and wind. Jake stood there in the open, Sonny bleeding against his chest, the night stretching around them. He knew, with terrifying clarity, that this wasn't over. And whatever he chose next, fight, run, expose, or surrender, would decide whether Sonny lived through the next night. Jake did not run after the car. He stood in the snow long enough for the cold to burn through his knees and into his bones. Sonny's blood warm against his jacket, the engine noise thinning into nothing. Chasing would have been instinct. It would also have been useless. Whoever had taken the time to cut a leash, to return to the same bench, to leave without being seen, whoever that was, had planned for pursuit. Jake chose something else. He wrapped Sonny tighter, lifted him carefully, and walked back to the truck with deliberate steps, breathing through the panic until it settled into resolve. At the cabin, he cleaned the wound as best he could, bandaging with shaking hands, whispering nonsense into Sonny's fur. The puppy clung to him, trembling, subsiding only when Jake's hand rested firmly along his spine. At dawn, Jake drove straight past the shelter and into town. The police station was a low concrete building with a single flag snapping sharply in the wind. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed. The smell of old coffee and paper hung in the air. Jake waited until a desk officer looked up. "I need to report an attempted theft," Jake said, "and an assault on an animal." Officer Daniel Brooks took the statement. Brooks was in his early 40s, tall with a lean runner's build, his sandy hair cropped close and his jaw clean-shaven. His eyes were attentive without being soft, someone who had learned to listen first and react later. He asked questions methodically, never interrupting, jotting notes with a pen worn smooth by use. "You didn't pursue," Brooks said, glancing up. "Why?" "Because they wanted me to," Jake replied. Brooks nodded once. "That tracks." Jake laid everything out: the cut leash, the missing backpack, the footprints, the anonymous call, the blood on the snow. He showed photos he'd taken with shaking hands in the park, timestamps intact. He handed over the folded note from the backpack, edges soft from handling. Brooks read it twice, then set it down carefully. "This isn't local stupidity," he said. "This is organized caution." By noon, the case had widened. Brooks looped in animal control and a regional nonprofit specializing in trafficking investigations. Their coordinator arrived that afternoon, Maria Alvarez, mid-50s, compact and sharp-eyed, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a severe bun. Her posture was upright, her movements efficient, the air around her charged with competence. She'd spent 20 years dismantling puppy mills and transport rings across state lines, and had the scars, visible and otherwise, to show for it. She examined Sonny with a practiced eye, careful not to overwhelm him. Sonny trembled at first, then settled when Jake stayed close, his body a living boundary. "Golden retriever," Maria said quietly. 2 months, high demand, easy to move. She looked at Jake. "They tested you. They wanted to see how far you'd go." Jake swallowed. "They came back." "Yes," Maria said, "because they thought you'd break." They didn't. The next weeks blurred into vigilance. Surveillance cameras went up around the shelter and the park. Motion lights were installed along the fence. Brooks coordinated with neighboring counties, matching reports, missing litters, forged chips, vans that idled and vanished. Maria's team traced shell accounts and transport routes, patterns forming where before there had been only fear. Sunny underwent surgery at Northridge under Dr. Walsh's steady hands. The procedure was delicate, realignment, reinforcement, but successful. When Sunny woke, groggy and sore, he searched until Jake's face came into focus. Then he rested, breath deepening, trust intact. Spring crept in almost unnoticed. Snow retreated from the edges of roads, revealing mud and new grass. The air softened. Jake drove to the shelter each day with Sunny riding beside him, a brace on his leg, chin resting on the seat, eyes tracking the horizon. The operation broke just before April. Brooks called Jake at dawn. "They're moving tonight," he said. "Multiple locations. We have warrants." Jake didn't go. He waited. By morning, the news traveled fast through town. Vehicles seized, arrests made, names withheld pending charges. Maria called later, voice steady with exhaustion. "It's done," she said. "At least this branch." Jake sat on the porch steps, Sunny's head heavy on his knee, and let the relief arrive in pieces. Sunny healed quickly. With physical therapy and patience, his gait steadied. The brace came off in stages. He learned to run again, awkward at first, then freer, ears flapping, tongue lolling, joy uncomplicated by memory. Jake filled out the adoption papers without ceremony. When Linda slid them across the desk, she smiled in that small, private way that meant she approved. Emily hugged him, brief and fierce. Sarah cried quietly, wiping her cheeks and laughing at herself. Even Bear thumped his tail once, slow and dignified. Home settled around them. Sunny developed routines, waiting by the door at dusk, nose pressed to the crack, ears cocked for Jake's footsteps. When Jake returned, Sunny wagged, not frantic, not fearful, just happy, present. He slept through the night now, curled close, breathing even. One evening, as the last light faded, Jake watched Sunny sit upright at the window, posture alert, gaze fixed on the road. "You're waiting," Jake said softly. Sunny turned his head, looked at him, and wagged once. Not for the past, for the sound of a truck pulling in, for the certainty that someone would come back. Jake rested his hand on Sunny's head, feeling the steady warmth beneath his palm, knowing that the winter had taken its toll and given something back. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, through a frozen night, a trembling heart, and one person who refuses to walk away. If you believe in God, you may call this grace. If you don't, you may call it chance. But when compassion appears at the exact moment it's needed, when a life survives because another chose courage over fear, it's hard to deny that something greater is at work. In our daily lives, we all pass moments like this. A voice we could ignore, a pain that isn't ours until we make it ours, a choice to stay when walking away would be easier. Sunny didn't survive because he was lucky. He survived because someone listened. And perhaps that is how God works most often, through ordinary people making extraordinary choices. If this story touched you, please share it. Someone, somewhere, may need this reminder tonight. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you believe, type Amen for every life still waiting to be seen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so more stories of hope can reach the hearts that need them most. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps, and may you always be the miracle someone else is praying for.